Okay, let's pick up where we left off last time, which was with false beliefs and intentionality and intersubjectivity. We already talked about this, but just put it up as a reminder. Consciousness and intentionality and social cognition intentionality are all kind of related here. If you've got a statement about intentionality like Jane believes that something or something is true, then that's a statement about Jane's conscious mental state. That's what's known as first order intentionality. But if what Jane believes is something about what Peter believes or supposes or thinks or wants or whatever, then you've got intersubjectivity. You've got one person trying to understand the mental states of another person, and that's really what social cognition is all about. And as I argued last time, intersubjectivity is really the end state. That's where social cognition is headed. Now, when you look at the kind of traditional cognitive or social cognitive developmental literature, you might get the idea that intersubjectivity really stops with the false belief test, which is something that most normal kids will pass by the time they're aged 5. Well, it turns out not to be quite the case, at the least because there's more to social cognition than second-order intentionality. There's more to social cognition than intersubjectivity. As illustrated here, you've got Jane believing that Peter supposes that Sarah thinks that Simon believes that Sarah would like to go out with Peter. Here you've got all sorts of levels of intentionality here. It's all social cognition. It's all one person trying to figure out what another person thinks. But in this case, it's what one person trying to figure out what another person thinks about somebody, what somebody else thinks. And as I pointed out last time, at least in this Kinderman study, people do okay until they get about to fifth level of intentionality, okay? So you've got somebody thinking about somebody else's thoughts 3 people out, and that's where we begin to make mistakes. And it turns out that that's not just a memory problem, because if you just look at simple physical causality, stories that represent simple physical causality, we can do fine out to at least 6 levels of causality. So it's not just a recursion problem. The constraint on levels of intentionality seems to have something to do with social cognition, with our understandings of other people's states of mind. Let's just stick with second-order intentionality for a moment. We've seen how kids, normal kids, do on what's known as a first-order false belief test, the one where the puppet has put the ball into the oatmeal container and then the puppet goes away and then the experimenter and the child move the ball from the oatmeal container into the box. Let's look at how the kids do with what's known as second-order false beliefs. So remember, the first-order false belief, Mary thinks that the ball's in the can, but the ball is really in the box, okay? Second-order false belief tacks a belief on top of that. John thinks that Mary thinks that the ball is in the can, but Mary really thinks that the ball is in the box. So it's John's belief about what Mary believes that's really at issue. Joseph Perner and his colleagues have tested people on these kinds of things by developing a set of stories which are kind of exemplified by what's known in the trade as the ice cream truck story. You've had the Donald story. Social psychology is full of these kind of canonical stories that people use over and over and over again. Perner and Wimmer wrote the ice cream truck story, which goes as follows. John and Mary think that the ice cream truck will stay in the park all day. Okay, so they're in the park and there's the ice cream truck and they think it's going to stay in the park all day. Mary says she's going to buy an ice cream in the afternoon and she leaves John sitting in the park. A little bit later, John learns that the truck is going to move from the park to the church. And because Mary's already gone, she's not present to receive this information, okay? But later on, through another route, it turns out that Mary learns as well that the truck is moving to the church, but John's not present when Mary learns this information. So now later in the day, John goes to Mary's house for help with his homework, okay? And Mary's mother says she went to get an ice cream. And the question is, where does John go to find Mary? Okay? Remember, Mary said she was going to buy an ice cream in the afternoon. John learns that the truck is moving to the church. He doesn't think she knows that. Mary does, in fact, know that, but she doesn't think he knows that. So now the question is, where does John go to find Mary? Well, actually, you can do both questions. First order theory of mind, where did Mary go to get ice cream? Okay, where did Mary go? She went to the church. Okay, we know that. Okay, but now, where did John go to look for Mary? Okay, and it's what Perner and Wimmer did was to ask subjects these questions, okay, to find out how they were handling second order intentionality, and then they asked them to justify their answers in various ways. So, for example, what they call a belief justification. John would go look for Mary in the park because he doesn't know that she already knows that the ice cream truck has moved. Or there might be a belief information kind of justification, which basically says that John doesn't know that Mary had already gotten this information from the ice cream man. Or there'd be just kind of a simple initial location justification whereas John believes that Mary said she'd go to the park to get ice cream, which in fact she didn't say. Remember, all she said was, I'm going to go get ice cream in the afternoon. Well, here's how subjects perform. These are normal, intact children on second order theory of mind, and notice what the age range is. 3, 4, 5-year-olds fail this task. They just can't perform it at all, even though they do fine with first-order false beliefs. They can't handle second-order false beliefs. 7-year-olds have a lot of difficulty. Here in the blue, we've got performance with no aids. In the green, we've got performance when you give them a little memory aid. Now, remember, Mary wasn't there when John talked to the ice cream truck the vendor. That memory aid helps performance a little bit. But what you can see here is that the average subject doesn't begin, the average child doesn't begin to pass the second order false belief test until he or she is 9 or 10 years old. So that's good 4 or 5 years after children pass the first order false belief test. So if the development of social cognition is the development of intersubjectivity, the development of our ability to appreciate what's going through the minds of somebody else, it's not the case that that endpoint is achieved somewhere between age 3 and age 5. At least as far as second order theory of mind is concerned, that seems to be something that's achieved somewhere around age 10. And since we know from the Kinderman study that people can handle about 4 or 5 orders of intentionality, you can assume that if somebody tested for third order theory of mind, think what the ice cream truck story would be like at that level, it would take even longer. Okay, so there's hope for all of us. There's still development after 3. Okay, so adding layers onto the theory of mind is one way in which social, cognitive, developmental psychologists have tried to answer questions about how social cognition develops. And what happens is we push the development of social cognition forward so that it hasn't all happened by age 5. There's still room to grow at age 10 or 12 or 13 or whatever. The other direction in which research has gone has been to bring the development of a theory of mind back in time to see if we can push the envelope, as it were, to identify aspects of a theory of mind even in very young children. Remember, the standard view is that theory of mind is something that develops around 4 or 5, and it's an old trick, a very honorable trick, a very old trick in developmental psychology to say, oh, you can get this in 5-year-olds. I wonder if you can get it in 5-month-olds or 5-day-olds or 5-minute-olds or whatever. And exactly the same kind of thing happened here. Again, this is work by Joseph Perner, and what Perner noticed was 2- and 3-year-olds, they will typically fail the false belief test. Okay, the false belief test of first-order theory of mind. But if you ask them again, they might get it the second time. Okay, so they seem to be able to have some idea of where things are, even if that doesn't translate itself properly into performance. Here is, I think, an experiment that really pushes the development of a theory of mind back a long ways. This is work by Onishi and Balergian at the University of Illinois, testing for the theory of mind in 15-month-old infants. Now, what's the first thing we know about 15-month-old infants? They don't have a lot of language, right? So you can't give them the false belief test. You can't have the puppet and the ball and the oatmeal container and the can and all this kind of stuff. You've got to do something different. So what Onishi and Balergian did was to invent a totally nonverbal version of the theory of mind the task, in which there's a situation that's basically a false belief type of situation, and there's some behavior that violates the expectancies that have been set up in that situation. And it turns out, as a rule, there are some exceptions to this. I don't want to get into it. As a rule, infants tend to look longer, even infants tend to look longer at counter-expectational events. So if something happens that surprises them, they'll look at it, okay? So Onishi and Balergian were able to use this looking measure to make inferences about whether even very young children, 15-month-old infants, are making inferences about what other people think and believe. Here's how they did it. This is one of my Faustian experiments, okay? I really love this experiment. So here's what happens. Okay, what we've got here is on the first trial, there's an actor, okay, right here. So there's a stage and there's a screen. This is a typical infant the cognition type of setup. And so the first thing the infant sees is this stage that has two boxes, a green box and a yellow box, and a slice of plastic watermelon in it. Real watermelon is too messy for use in experiments. And then an actor appears, the screen opens, and an actor appears, and the actor hides the watermelon in the green box, not the yellow box. Okay, so that's all the infant sees. Then on trial 2, the actor appears and reaches into the green box and pulls out the watermelon, puts it back in. On trial 3, the actor appears and reaches into the green box and pulls out the watermelon and puts it back in. Okay, so that's to establish that the actor believes that the watermelon is in the green box. That's what goes on in the familiarization phase. Okay, then what happens is these kids are divided into 4 groups for what's known as the belief induction trial. And what happens here is that for one group, this is A, B, C, and D. These are a little bit complicated. But what happens up here is that the actor isn't doing anything anymore, but the actor watches, okay, as the yellow box moves toward the green box. That's all the actor does. Okay, that's all the actor sees is the yellow box moving toward the green box. In the true belief yellow condition, what happens is the actor watches as the watermelon moves by virtue of a little pulley system, moves from the green box to the yellow box, okay? So here the actor is watching this happen. In what's known as the false belief green condition, notice that the actor isn't watching, but what the infant sees is the watermelon move from the green box to the yellow box, okay? And then in what's known as the false belief yellow condition, this is very complicated, okay? The actor watches as the watermelon moves from the green box to the yellow box. Then the actor goes away and the watermelon moves back from the yellow box to the green box, okay? So if the infant is getting any of this, it's pretty complicated, right? And you're pretty smart 21-year-olds, okay? It's pretty complicated. But you can kind of understand here that in the true belief green condition, the infant would have reason for thinking that the actor knows where things are and that belief is true. And in the true belief yellow condition, the infant will know that the actor knows that the watermelon is now in the yellow box. In the false belief green condition, the infant's supposed to be able to make the inference that the actor won't know that the watermelon is now in the yellow box. And in the false belief yellow condition, where there's this very complicated scenario, the infant's supposed to know whether that the actor doesn't know that the watermelon is moved back to the green box. So now what happens when infants just kind of look now on the test trial where the actor comes in, okay, appears, and either reaches into the green box or reaches into the yellow box, okay? Depending on what the infant believes about what the actor believes, or what the infant believes about what the actor knows, we should see the infant being surprised, okay? And in fact, that's exactly what happens, okay? In the true belief green condition, the infant is surprised, looks longer when the actor reaches into the yellow box. Why is she doing that? She knows that the watermelon is in the green box. In the true belief yellow condition, the infant is surprised when the actor reaches into the green box because the infant's seen that the actor knows that the watermelon has moved. In the false belief green condition, the infant is surprised when the actor reaches into the yellow box, and in the false belief yellow condition, the infant is surprised when the actor reaches into the green box. In each of these instances, the infant behaves as if it is surprised, puzzled, looking longer, trying to figure out, wondering why, when the actor engages in something that is inconsistent with what the infant would ordinarily believe is the actor's own beliefs. On these kinds of grounds, then, it appears as if even infants, 15 months old, have something like a theory of the mind, an ability to make inferences about what some other individual thinks and feels and believes and so on. Although they may not be able to express this verbally, okay, they may not be able to handle it when we're dealing with the puppet and the box and the ball and the oatmeal box. Still, evidence like this suggests that this world is not a blooming, buzzing confusion for these infants, right? They've already got something figured out about it, and what they've got figured out about it is something about what the actor knows or thinks he or she knows or believes. So here we've got a nice example of a study that pushes back the theory of the mind, the theory of mind, so that it's not just something that you get somewhere between age 3 and age 5, closer to age 5. It's something that you've got at least the rudiments of much earlier than that. Okay, so infants seem to have a theory of mind after all. They have some sense of what other people believe. They have some sense that other people might believe something that's incorrect, or at the very least, they have some sense that other people might believe something that's different from their own beliefs. Moreover, even these 15-month-olds have expectations about other people's behavior, which is that they expect that other people will behave in accordance with their beliefs. They're surprised when they don't behave in accordance with their beliefs. They pay more attention to what's going on. Okay, so now we've seen two ways in which research on the development of a theory of mind, the development of intersubjectivity has proceeded since the false belief test and the theory of mind that came on the scene. First, by looking at higher levels of intentionality, higher levels of intersubjectivity. Second, by pushing the acquisition of a theory of mind back further and further in time. Next question is, well, let's repeat this experiment with 5-month-olds and see what they do. If somebody hasn't done that yet, I'm sure somebody's doing that. Okay. But there's also other evidence that even very young kids have some idea about what other people believe and desire. Okay, here is another direction in which this research has gone, which is to look for the neural substrates of the theory of mind. This is work by Rebecca Sachs and Nancy Canwisher. Canwisher was the same person who helped identify the so-called fusiform face area. And now this is with adults. It's not easy to put 5-year-olds in an fMRI machine. They're a little squirmy. It can be done, I suppose, but they didn't do that. And what Sachs and Canwisher did was to put adults, college students, in a magnet and ask them to read various kinds of stories. Some stories were stories about true versus false beliefs. So in this story, there's a boy sitting at home at his kitchen table, and he's trying to make paper mache. You all remember how you used to do this in elementary school? You need water and flour and newspaper and stuff like that. And then he discovers he doesn't have any glue, so he decides to go down to the corner store and get some Elmer's glue. Meanwhile, his mother comes home, sees all the strips of newspaper all over the kitchen, and picks them up and throws them out. Okay? The mother didn't know that the boy was making paper mache, so she thought that this was just kind of junk that he had left around. Or there were stories about mechanical inferences, that there was a tea kettle left boiling on the stove all night. When somebody came down for breakfast, there was no water left in the kettle in the morning. Nothing there about theory of mind, nothing there about anything except kind of mechanical causation, leaving a kettle boiling, all the water evaporates. And then there were stories about human actions that didn't involve true or false beliefs, about how, for example, a woman was walking to work and she saw a crane in front of her, so she went around it. Right? That's nothing about, no serious reasoning about people's beliefs there. And so what Sachs and Canwisher did was to image adult subjects' brains while they were reading these stories and try to identify a particular part of the brain, this keeps going out of me, a particular part of the brain that was active when subjects are processing stories about true and false beliefs, but not particularly active when people are processing stories about mechanical inferences or about human actions. And they did, in fact, find such an area here in the junction of the temporal and parietal lobes, roughly where Wernicke's area is. Not Wernicke's area, but it's roughly where it is. You can see it here, okay, right up there in the yellow. This is a rear view of the skull. This is a top, well, actually it's a bottom view of the skull. And what you can see is that this area, especially well, actually in both lobes, is activated when subjects read these kinds of stories. So Sachs and Canwisher concluded that somewhere in the temporal parietal junction is a brain module that is dedicated to reasoning about other people's minds. A brain module that is specifically activated when people do these kinds of things. And they also identified another area in the extrastriate cortex of the occipital lobe that seems to be activated when people are thinking about their bodies. Okay, but we're not going to focus on that. Let's just focus on what they call the temporal parietal junction theory of mind area. Okay. So much of the literature on intersubjectivity is focused on the false belief task and variance on the false belief task. But it's pretty clear that there are aspects of the theory of mind that go beyond of false beliefs. And Henry Wellman at the University of Michigan has kind of produced a catalog of various aspects of the theory of mind beyond false beliefs, and also developed a number of tests that are intended to tap these aspects of the theory of mind. One of these are what are known as diverse desires tests. The child is presented with two snacks, a carrot or a cookie, and then the child's asked to state her own preference. Would you rather have a carrot or a cookie? kid picks something, okay, and then the child is told that there's this other person, Mr. Jones, who prefers the other thing, okay, and then the child is asked which item Mr. Jones will choose, and the child is correct if she infers that Mr. Jones will choose will make the choice that's opposite to her own. That the child who passes that test has some understanding that other people's desires might be different from his or hers. Here is an analogous test for diverse beliefs. Okay, there's a cat that's hiding, and it can hide either in the bushes outside or it can hide in the garage. You ask the child, where do you think the cat is hiding? The child states the belief, and then you say to the child, well, there's this person, Linda, who believes the opposite from you. Where will Linda look for the cat? And of course, the correct answer is that the target will look wherever the child, the opposite of where the child would look. And that is a simple-minded test that shows whether the child appreciates that other people might have beliefs that are different from his or her own. Knowledge access test. Child is shown a closed drawer and told that there's a toy dog inside, not a real dog, but a toy dog. So the child's own knowledge is that there's a dog inside, and then the child is told about another child, Polly, who's never seen this bureau drawer, and she's asked, what will Polly think is inside? And the correct answer, of course, is that Polly has no idea what's inside the drawer, right? So here is an aspect of theory of mind that talks about diversity, if you will, in access to knowledge, that some people have knowledge that other people don't have. Not exactly beliefs, but knowledge. Here is basically what's known as contents false belief. This is basically a variant on the standard false belief task. Then there's what's known as explicit false belief. Okay, so the child is told about this kid, Scott, who wants to find his mittens. The child is told that the mittens are really in his backpack, but Scott thinks they're in the closet. Where will he look? And the child is correct if she says that Scott will look in the closet, because he's going to act on his beliefs. Okay. Belief and emotion. Okay. So here's how beliefs can give rise to emotional states. That's another aspect of theory of mind. Okay. So there's this child, Teddy, and there's a Cheerios box. Says Cheerios on it, but it's actually got rocks in it. Okay. So Teddy, we know, likes Cheerios, and he goes out to play, and then he comes back inside for a bowl of Cheerios. The question is, first, how happy is Teddy when he sees the box? The child ought to say, oh, Teddy will be overjoyed when he sees the box because he really wants the Cheerios, and there's the box of Cheerios. How happy is Teddy when he opens the box? The child ought to say, Teddy's going to be unhappy, he's going to be disappointed because the Cheerios box has rocks in it. Okay, so how you get from belief to emotion is another aspect of the theory of mind. And then there's a test of real and apparent emotion. The child is presented with schematic diagrams of 3 emotional faces, one happy, one sad, and one neutral. Then the child says, well, Rosie told a mean joke about Matt, okay, but Matt tried to hide how he felt, and so the child's asked to point to the diagram that shows how Matt really felt, the sad face, and then how did Matt try to look to others? She should point to the neutral face or the happy face. Again, the idea that people's apparent emotions might be different from their real emotions. Another aspect of theory of mind that's really not covered by the standard false belief test. Okay, well, the point of this is Wellman and Liu gave these tests to a bunch of children aged 3 to 5 to see how they would do on them. And it turned out that these children, remember, 3 to 5 is the period where children are beginning to pass the standard false beliefs test. And here you have it, contents false beliefs, with average performance about a little bit less than 60% of the kids passing. But most of the kids pass the diverse desires test. Most of the kids pass the diverse beliefs test. Most of the kids pass the knowledge access test, even though they might fail the contents false beliefs test. And even if you pass the contents false beliefs test, you might not pass the explicit false beliefs test, you might not pass the beliefs emotion test, and you definitely might not pass the test of appreciating the difference between real and apparent emotions. Another way of talking about this is that the development of intersubjectivity does not apparently stop with the standard false beliefs test. Intersubjectivity with what respects? With respect to knowledge, with respect to beliefs, with respect to desires, with respect to feelings, and so on. They're different. Now, what Wellman and Liu proposed was that this battery of tests constitutes what they call a Gutman scale of the theory of mind. Gutman scale is a technical term in psychometrics where the items in a test, in a Gutman scale test, the items of a test are arranged so that if you pass one item, you're very, very, very likely to have passed all the previous items in the test. Gutman scale tests are really nice because once somebody fails 2 items in a row, you can stop the test. Those of you who have taken the SAT or the GRE recently, the SAT and the GRE is basically administered as a Gutman the scale test, which is to say if you stop passing items, they stop the test, right? Now, you haven't had that much experience with this because you all got 800s on your SATs, but there are mere mortals out there who didn't have that experience. And these days, the Educational Testing Service says, let's just not waste everybody's time. You got a 550 and live with it. Okay, so that's actually what this is. But the idea here is that the normal course of the development of intersubjectivity begins with an appreciation of other people's desires, continues with an appreciation of other people's cognitive states, states of knowledge and belief, and ends up with an appreciation of other people's emotional states. That's the general idea behind this. Okay, so here we go. They argue that, again, 3-year-olds probably already have an appreciation of diverse desires and diverse beliefs. 4-year-olds tend to pass the false belief test. 5-year-olds tend to pass the test about real and apparent emotion. So you can see a developmental progression. It's not just kids are not doing anything until they get to be 4 years old when, voila, they pass the false beliefs test, right? There's work being done all the way through. Okay. Simon Baron Cohen, that's Simon Baron Cohen, who is the cousin of Sacha Baron Cohen, just so you can make a connection to popular culture. I don't know which one is the good Baron Cohen and which one's the bad Baron Cohen, but he's at Oxford. In any event, Simon Baron Cohen, in a provocative set of papers and books, have argued that what the theory of mind is all about in its various guises is mind reading, the ability to make inferences about what's on somebody else's mind. And in a very interesting theory, he's argued that there are basically 4 different elements of mind reading. This is an alternative approach to Wellman and Liu's idea, and that each of these are associated with a specific module in the brain. So the intentionality detector basically perceives behaviors in terms of people, makes inferences about people's goals when they engage in various kinds of behaviors. The eye direction detector picks up whether somebody's looking at me or looking someplace else. That's the basic idea behind the eye direction detector. The shared attention mechanism basically leads a person to look where somebody else is looking. If I say look, if I just point over there, you know, well, you don't, but most people would look over there. That's just like the idea is, oh, he's looking at something. If I look where he's looking, I'll see what he's seeing. Okay, that's another aspect of intersubjectivity. And then what he calls the theory of mind mechanism, which is basically exemplified by performance on the first-order false beliefs test. Again, Cohen argues that these are 4 separate aspects of the development of the theory of mind. Each of these aspects is mediated by a separate and independent cognitive module, and these cognitive modules are instantiated in brain tissue as particular brain modules or brain systems. Okay, I'm going to skip this. This is the intentionality detector. This is another really nice study on showing that even infants have some kind of intentionality detector. I talk about this in the lecture supplements a little bit. So for those of you who are really interested in this, I'm going to do this. The reason I'm skipping over it is that I want to get to some work on autism. But basically, Baron Cohen has argued that before 9 months of age, infants have acquired some kind of intentionality detector. They are able to analyze behaviors and attribute behaviors to the actor's goals or desires. They have an eye direction detector. They can figure out whether somebody's looking at them or not, and if not, where that person is looking. But less than 9 months old, Baron Cohen suggests children don't have a shared attention mechanism. They don't look where somebody else is looking. They don't have the sense that if you look where somebody else is looking, you'll see what they see. And he argues this is before the Onishi and Belergione study, that there's no theory of mind. There's no theory of mind mechanism active in these very young infants either. Certainly not the kind of theory of mind mechanism that would support performance on the standard false beliefs test. However, somewhere between 9 and 18 months, half a year and a half of age, the shared attention mechanism kicks in, and somewhere around 4 years of age, based on the standard false beliefs test, the theory of mind mechanism that kicks in. This is another view of the development of social cognition, an alternative to the Wellman and Liu one. I don't want to take a position on which one is right. They're probably both right. That's the way it goes in psychology. But the idea here is that there's a developmental progression. There are some aspects of the theory of mind that kick in before other aspects of the theory of mind do. Now, the relevance of this is that Baron Cohen famously has proposed a particular hypothesis about a particular form of mental illness, a psychiatric disorder known as autism, which basically is known as the mind blindness hypothesis of autism. And he says, look, if the theory of mind is really about mind reading, the ability to make inferences about what's going through somebody else's mind, autistic individuals seem to lack this particular ability. They seem to be unable to make inferences about what's on somebody else's mind. And so that kind of sets up a program of research in which we compare autistic children and unimpaired children, so-called normal children, with respect to these various aspects of mind reading. But what's interesting about Baron Cohen's proposal, and he was really the first to make it, which is why I'm spending so much time on him, which is the idea that autism is a specific disorder of social cognition. Schizophrenia might be a specific disorder of thinking. Depression might be a specific disorder in emotion, and so on and so forth. But what sets autism apart from everybody else is that it appears to be a specific deficit in social cognition. And there are reasons for thinking that that might be the case. Autism used to be called Kanner syndrome because it was first described by a child psychiatrist named Leo Kanner in the early 1940s. And if you look at Kanner's descriptions of the children that he was studying, there really does seem to, those descriptions really do seem to focus on deficits in social functioning. So here's one. He seems almost to draw into a shell and live within himself. When taken into a room, he completely disregarded the people and instantly went for objects. When a hand was held out to him so that he could not possibly ignore it, he played with it briefly as if it were a detached object. He didn't respond to other people. Here's a kid who seems to be not really in the social world. Here is another one. It's a different child. He never looked up at people's faces. When he had any dealings with other people, he treated them or their parts as if they were objects. And then this one, the third kid, on a crowded beach, he would walk straight toward his goal, regardless of whether this involved walking over newspapers, hands, feet, or torsos, much to the discomfort of their owners. And he didn't intentionally deviate so as to walk on people. It's just that if they were in the way, he just walked right over them, okay? He didn't seem to think about them as objects that would have mental states, as people who would be annoyed at this. It was as if he did not distinguish people from things, or at least did not concern himself about the distinction. So again, even in the very earliest descriptions of autism, those descriptions seem to focus on difficulties in social relations, and especially difficulties in appreciating that people are not just things, but that people have desires not to be walked on, they have beliefs and feelings and so on. These days, in the fourth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the diagnosis of autism has now become formalized into a broad class of disorders, now at the moment known as pervasive developmental disorder. In the draft of the fifth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, this is now called autistic spectrum disorder. But basically, this disorder affects primarily social functions, communication functions, which of course are social functions, and also imagination. And it includes classic autism, what used to be known as Kanner syndrome, and also it includes Asperger's syndrome, which was described a year after Kanner did his work. To make a long story short, Kanner syndrome, people with Kanner syndrome, people with Asperger's syndrome tend to share the social deficits of people with autism, but they tend to be higher functioning. They tend to have better language skills and so on. Okay, I don't want to do this much here. Okay, here's just more on DSM-4 and how you recognize it. Impairments in social interaction, problems with nonverbal behaviors, eye-to-eye gaze, problems with age-appropriate peer relationships, lack of spontaneous sharing, lack of social reciprocity. So autistic children tend to have these kinds of problems. They tend to engage in repetitive or stereotype behavior, tend to become preoccupied with things, especially objects, and they tend to have impairments in communication as well. Again, there's this distinction between classic autism and Asperger's disorder. Autistic kids may be developmentally delayed. They don't have good language, typically. People with Asperger's syndrome tend not to have communication delays anyway, and there seems to be no problem with cognitive development. They just don't have a sense of what it's like to don't seem to have a sense of what it's like to live in the social world. Okay, so if that's true, then the prediction is that autistic children ought to not do well on tasks that assess intersubjectivity, tasks that tap the child's theory of mind. So Peterson and Siegel, this is a very good study on this subject, took a group of normal children aged 4 to 5 years. These are children who would be expected to pass the false beliefs test, and then a group of autistic children who were twice their age, autistic children who are 9 and 10 years old, and then tested these children with a battery of false belief tests in which either the object changes location, or the object changes appearance, or there's a change in the container, okay? Just variance on the standard false beliefs task. And what you can see here is that on all three of the variants on the false belief task, autistic children who are aged 9 and 10 are impaired in performance compared to normal children who are aged 4 or 5, normal children who are half their age. So it's evidence like this that is consistent with the hypothesis that autistic children have a specific deficit in theory of mind kinds of reasoning. Now, autistic children have other kinds of problems too, so that's not really the right, it's not a sufficient experiment to compare autistic kids with normal kids. So what Peterson and Siegel did was to include two other groups of children who have developmental problems. These were deaf children aged 9 to 10 years. Some of these deaf children were native users of American Sign Language. Some of these children were known as oral deaf. That is, they were able to hear at one point, but then they lost their hearing. And then there are deaf signers from hearing families. These children are particularly interesting because their families don't often know sign language. Okay, so there's a lot of problem communicating in the family because, well, to put it bluntly, the kids and the parents are speaking a different language. They have a lot of difficulties. So Peterson and Siegel include these kinds of groups as a kind of control for having problems, especially problems in communication. And what you can see here, here's the comparison between the normal and the autistic kids. And here are the comparisons with respect to the deaf kids. Deaf children who are native signers, that is, who've been brought up signing from the beginning, have no theory of mind deficit compared to normal kids. Oral deaf, not so much of a problem. Deaf children of hearing parents, that is, signing deaf children of hearing parents, they have a problem as well. They're performing about as poorly as the autistic children. So again, this is not to say that the hypothesis that autistic children lack a theory of mind is wrong. It's important, as always, a problem I talked about last week, you gotta get the controls right, okay? So it's not just as easy, this is not the kind of hypothesis that's as easy to test as get a group of autistic kids, a group of normal kids, throw them in front of some test battery. It may very well be that both autistic children and the signing children of hearing parents have problems navigating the theory of mind for quite different reasons. Okay, so we just really don't know about that yet. Peterson and Wellman are colleagues, so they looked at the various tests beyond the theory of mind before, and what you can see here in the gray is the performance of autistic children. In the green, performance of preschoolers. These are the 4 to 5 year olds. Okay. Then we have two groups of deaf children, deaf children who are native sign language users, and deaf children who learn sign language late. Autistic kids, these autistic kids, had very little trouble with the diverse desires test of theory of mind. They had relatively little trouble with diverse beliefs. They had relatively little trouble with knowledge access. Where they fell down, okay, was in terms of the standard false beliefs test. These are 9 to 10-year-old autistic kids performing comparably to 4 or 5-year-old normal children. And then there's an interesting thing here where that these autistic children actually performed better than the normal children on making the distinction between real and apparent emotion. A very interesting kind of puzzling finding. Okay, so if the development of social cognition is the development of intersubjectivity, the development of intersubjectivity is not completely assessed by something as simple as the false beliefs task. There's more to intersubjectivity than that. But the false beliefs test is a very nice milestone, okay, in kind of measuring the acquisition or the development of a theory of mind of intersubjectivity. Based on this kind of the testing regime, we can say that, you know, normal kids have a theory of mind, something like a theory of mind very early on, but it begins to really become fleshed out somewhere in late childhood, the move between across elementary school. But autistic kids, at least in terms of the standard test of theory of mind, just don't seem to get it. There does really seem to be a specific deficit in theory of mind, not uniquely affecting autistic kids, but a specific deficit in theory of mind nonetheless. Okay, the next question is, do other animals have theory of mind? The answer is no, not really. We don't have time to do that, but I'll have some information on that in the lecture supplements as well. Administering a false belief test to a chimpanzee turns out to be a very interesting thing to do, but when you do it, they fail. Yes, quick question.
How do autistic kids perform on like the mirror test? Do they recognize themselves in the mirror relatively well, or?
You know, I don't think I know that. I'm sure somebody's done that. I will find that out. I'll post an answer on the forum. If you don't have that answer within a day, say something on the forum and I'll get a response. To be honest with you, I don't know. I'll find out.